Hello, I'm Bas Hamer, and today we'll be talking about the tutorials that we've created for the PossumLabs.DSL libraries. And the first one we'll be talking about is working with existing data, and this is assuming that you've chosen the PossumLabs.DSL.Core version of your implementation. If you've chosen the English version, please see the English version of this tutorial. It's going to be a lot shorter. Alright, so let's take a quick look at what feature we're going to be working with. So what we want to do is leveraging existing data. And when you want to leverage existing data, it's usually like a particular account, right? So your test cases are written with the idea of this account always exists in the system. And we use this account to get started for test cases. In our particular example, we're going to have two different accounts that are existing. One of them has they all have an email and a password, and we have different setups that we are going for. So the first thing we want to verify is that the email is set as expected for both of these, and then we have a password for the admin account and a password for the guest account. Now, this actual data that we're going to be loading up is going to come from our entities folder, the existing.json file. And what we see in here is that the email is specified for both of these, but we don't see that the passwords are set up exactly the way. Right? We have password being loaded here, that's as expected, and here it says should come from environment variable. And we'll take a look at how you can leverage environment variables to inject data into this. The basic structure of this existing file is as follows. You have an array of different types. Here's the type name. This is a user. So this maps to the class name of the user entity. And then we have values. This is again an array. In this case, we have two different values. You'll have the name of your particular variable. And this one is called admin. And then you have the values, and then you have the different properties, and you can set the properties over here. You can do a little bit more in here. You can apply templates, but right now we're just going to focus on this aspect of the code. So let's take a quick look at our user. We have our user. It has a generated ID, it has a password, it has an email, and a log format. The log format is something that you'll see on every entity. It's part of the interface. And this is just so that we have a generic way to log users or any kind of entity at the end of tests or when things go wrong or when we have other types of integrations. So what you'll see is you'll have something that says, okay, we have a key of admin, and then it will have an ID, and it will print out the ID, in which case, right now it's a random GUID. Okay, we also have a list of functions not being used in this test. And then we have a repository. It inherits from repository Stepbase, talks about users, and when we take a look at this, we have some initialization code. We'll be covering this later. I left it in here so that everything is the same. And we have then the different methods for creating data. We'll again cover this on later tutorials, but there's nothing else really going on in here about loading this particular file with the existing data. So the place that we have to go to take a look at this is actually going to be in the framework initialization steps. So framework initialization steps does what it says it does, right? It initializes the framework. And what we do in here is we effectively set up all the components and we tell things to run in particular orders to make life easier. Over here we have our template manager, and then we have our existing data manager, which is the one that we're actually dealing with right here. So we have our existing data manager. It takes an interpreter. The interpreter is the thing that actually keeps track of all of your variables that you have available. And then we initialize it using the, we also give it the template manager, but then we initialize it and we pass in the current assembly, which just tells us where the executing code is running, which also tells us where the JSON files are being sent to. This existing data manager is actually the bit that actually loads up the JSON file and figures out what's going on. Now, there's still one question left to be talked about. This is dealing with our, users. How are these things registered so that it understands that it needs to look for this user thing, right? Because there's nothing in here. There's some initialize code here, but this is just dealing with defaults. It doesn't do anything else. So where is this code coming from? Well, this code is actually coming from the repository base. There's actually a couple of hooks that are actually in here as well. So this is actually included in the same project. Yes, it is. And what we have in here is the base setup for a repository Stepbase. And what we have is an inheritance based upon Stepbase, which just gives it access to some properties. And it handles the interactions with the IOC container. And then we have, here we have a registration with the interpreter. So by inheriting from repository Stepbase, you automatically inherit this method of register repository with interpreter, and this tells the interpreter all the different types that are available. And because the existing data manager uses the interpreter, it is able to interact with these different components and put the data in the right place. Let's take a little bit more of a look in this file. There's one more class that's important to take a look at, and that is the repository base itself. The repository base is effectively a very fancy dictionary. It has a couple of additional methods and additional extensions, but what its main purpose is to keep track of all of the different variables of this type that are created. So the way that variables work inside of this project is, so variables in the Gherkin, is that everyone has to have a name and everything has to be of a type, and there has to be a repository base for that type registered with the interpreter for the variables to work. So yeah, I would suggest you copy paste this code and leverage this to get started. It has some of the basic implementations, but it's very stripped down as compared to everything you would be inheriting from the English project. But on the other hand, you are copy pasting code. That's not ideal. So you have the flexibility, but you also have to maintain a little bit more code. As far as other things that are going on here, we have the verification steps. This is what allows us to actually evaluate these statements, right? Then guest.email has the value guest@PossumLabs.com. We have our Stepbase. Stepbase, again, it's primarily IOC interactions. All of these different properties are actually being resolved through IOC. And we have in here, there's one more step that we have. And what we're doing in here is we're actually specifying an environment variable. So this is set to run before the feature. So this happens very early on. And what we end up doing is we set an environment variable of admin_password. So that's kind of like admin.password, except dots in environment variables don't work very well. And we specify that it's super secret. And this is allowing us to inject into our existing data different types of values using environment variables. So if you for some reason do have certain passwords, keys, or other things that you need to have available in your test cases, then you can use this to inject those values. You can also use this type of behavior to inject environment variables into your tests to modify how they run or what they run against or things like that. That's about it for this particular project. Again, the whole goal for this project is just to show how you can leverage the existing data and some of the components that are involved in it. And we'll continue on with lesson 2, and we'll be talking about how you can create new data, and we'll take a look at some of those methods that we have. Thank you very much for your time.